Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're a thoughtful investor trying to figure out how to navigate all these seismic shifts in global politics and economics,
It's a lot to track.
it is. And if you're specifically looking for some kind of guidance on securing your retirement funds, you've probably been looking for a roadmap.
A reliable one, yeah.
Well, today we are opening up a document that might just be exactly that, even though it wasn't, published with a prospectus in mind.
Indeed. We are definitely not treating this as purely a defense document.
Right.
We're analyzing the U.S. National Security Strategy, which was released in November 2025. And we're looking at it not just for its geopolitical outlook, but as an explicit, really comprehensive blueprint for American economic dominance over the next decade.
And the expert analysis we've been reviewing alongside it, it calls this document, quite frankly, a compass for investment.
That's the phrase they use, and I think it's spot on.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission here is to take these very specific excerpts from high-level government strategy and filter them through the lens of a long-term investor.
Exactly.
The core mission of the entire document is securing the U.S. as the world's strongest, richest, most powerful country. But the real question for you, the investor, is, how does that objective translate into strategic sectors, into capital flows, and ultimately into the performance of your portfolio?
To start, we should be clear about how this NSS defines strategy. It's very concrete.
It's not just a wish list.
Not at all. It is a realistic plan connecting desired ends with available means. And crucially, it demands what they call ruthless prioritization.
Okay.
The document makes it absolutely clear that its sole focus is the protection of core national interests, prioritizing the domestic well-being of its citizens above all external commitments.
And the analysis we've seen identifies this entire shift, this recentering of priorities, as the clear beginning of what they're calling the One America strategy.
That's the term, yes.
Now, here's where the analysis suggests the real story begins. Because the NSS doesn't just present a new strategy. It starts with an immediate, massive course correction that's rooted in a critique of history.
A very sharp critique.
It openly states that American strategies since the end of the Cold War went astray. So, what was the root cause of that perceived derailment, according to the document?
The document lists several intertwined failures. First, and this is the big one, there was a fundamental misjudgment on the whole premise of globalism and so-called free trade. The NSS contends that these policies were pursued with an almost ideological fervor rather than with national self-interest in mind, and that this led directly to the hollowing out of America's industrial base.
And by extension, gutting the economic stability of the middle class.
Precisely. That's the direct consequence they identify.
That's a very strong claim. How did they quantify the damage done by that globalist approach?
Well, the critique is twofold. Economically, they argue that by prioritizing low consumer prices over high domestic wages, it created a structural trade imbalance and, massive capital flight.
Okay.
Secondly, geopolitically, the U.S. failed to define its core interests clearly. This turned strategy into what the document actually terms a laundry list of wishes that was stretched all across the globe.
And that allowed allies to take advantage.
It did. It allowed wealthy allies in particular to offload their own defense costs onto the American taxpayer, which just further subsidized the economic hollowing out here at home.
So the thesis is that this idea of permanent global dominance was financially and socially unsustainable. It was undermining the very domestic foundation it was meant to protect.
Exactly. The new document, then, is a direct inversion of that entire premise.
And they don't mince words about it.
Not at all. They explicitly call this new document the necessary welcome correction. The foundation of this new strategy, as the NSS states, is built on the achievements and the, unapologetically national approach of President Trump's first administration.
So it's a stark rejection of that post-Cold War consensus.
It is a philosophical rejection, really, of the idea that interconnected global markets automatically guaranteed American security. Instead, the focus is brought sharply, decisively back home.
Defining national security as entirely dependent on national economic strength.
That is the new cornerstone.
So if the old strategies went astray, what is the ultimate end state the U.S. is striving for now? What do they want, strategically and constitutionally, for the American future?
The primary desired outcome is the continued survival and safety of the U.S. as an independent sovereign republic.
Okay, that's the high-level goal.
Right. But critically, this requires a government that actively secures the rights of its citizens and emphatically prioritizes their well-being and their interests above all international obligations. This isn't just rhetoric. They link this desired state to very tangible attributes of national power.
And those attributes, those desired outcomes, they're highly specific, and they focus on some non-traditional security elements, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Beyond just fielding the world's most powerful military, they list three non-negotiable outcomes.
What are they?
First, full control over borders and immigration. Second, achieving a highly resilient national infrastructure that can withstand anything from sophisticated cyber attacks to, catastrophic natural disasters.
Yeah, and the third.
And third, possessing a modern nuclear deterrent that's backed by next-generation missile defenses.
Let's focus on that third one for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
The analysis we read dubbed it the Golden Dome for the American homeland. What exactly does that metaphor entail?
The Golden Dome concept is a very clear reference to Israel's successful layered short-range defense system, the Iron Dome.
Right.
But this is scaled up dramatically to protect the entire continental U.S. The NSS envisions an integrated, layered missile defense architecture.
Using what kind of technology?
It would use both ground and space-based sensors and interceptors, specifically designed to eliminate the threat posed by advanced hypersonic weapons and, sophisticated massed missile attacks from potential adversaries.
So the strategic goal is just simple, raw security.
It is. It's to eliminate the ability of any adversary to hold America's population or its key infrastructure at risk. It's about securing the domestic environment for long-term investment and economic activity.
It really is the ultimate de-risking strategy. And this entire structure, military, technological, all hinges on the economy.
Completely.
The NSS places the U.S. economy front and center, defining it not just as a supporting tool, but as the bedrock.
It is the bedrock of the American way of life, the source of our global position, and the necessary foundation of our military power. This definition elevates economic policy, especially domestic economic policy, to the status of a national security imperative.
Meaning any policy that hurts the domestic economy is a national security threat.
By their definition, yes. Any policy that damages domestic economic resilience is, by definition, considered a threat to national security.
So what are the specific attributes the NSS demands from this bedrock economy? Because, strong is too vague for an investor making multi-year allocation decisions.
They demand a very specific profile. The world's strongest, most dynamic, innovative, and advanced economy.
Okay.
Furthermore, and this is absolutely key to the foundational shift we're talking about, they stress that it must be an economy that delivers widespread and broad-based prosperity.
Creating tangible upward mobility and rewarding hard work across all sectors.
Exactly. Not just at the top of the tech or financial industries. This has to be for everyone.
That explicitly addresses the hollowing out of the middle class that they identified as the failure of previous globalist strategies. So how does the NSS propose delivering this broad-based prosperity?
By demanding the world's most robust industrial base. They argue that widespread prosperity requires a physical economy, one where high-value goods are actually manufactured domestically.
So bringing manufacturing back.
And building the industrial skill base and the supply chain buffers needed to protect the domestic economy from any future global shocks.
Okay. Now we can transition to the core policy principles that dictate how the U.S. will interact with the world and, for our listeners, where capital is going to flow globally. These are framed as America first, and they seem highly non-traditional in their pragmatism.
They are very realistic in their assessment of global competition. Let's look at the first principle, peace through strength.
Right.
The document posits that strength is the only reliable deterrent. But this strength is defined holistically. It means it requires maintaining the strongest economy, developing the most advanced technologies, bolstering society's cultural health, and fielding the world's most capable military. It's an entire ecosystem of power where no single element can be neglected.
And the second principle is highly controversial, the primacy of nations. This is a direct challenge to that globalist framework they criticized earlier, isn't it?
It's a complete refutation of it. The nation-state is affirmed as the fundamental, legitimate political unit. The NSS argues it's both natural and just that all nations put their own interests first, just as the U.S. will put its own interests first.
And critically, the U.S. will stand against what they call sovereignty-sapping transnational organizations.
That's the phrase.
What does that mean for an investor? Which organizations are they targeting, And what does this imply for global regulatory frameworks?
It signals a decreased reliance on and potentially an aggressive withdrawal from multilateral bodies. Think the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and various UN structures that the NSS contends impose regulations or obligations that are contrary to American economic interests.
So for an investor, this means you can rely less on global regulatory stability from international consensus.
And more on bilateral national policy, on specific trade agreements, and national laws for commercial stability and protection. The U.S. will use its sovereign power, not global consensus, as its primary tool.
Following that thread, the focus on the pro-American worker is significant. The NSS mandates that policy must be pro-worker, not merely pro-growth.
This is a structural requirement. It ensures that prosperity has to be broadly based, widely shared, and must reward labor over capital when they're defining the national interest.
And that directly dictates policies on what? Trade tariffs?
Aggressive policies on trade tariffs, yes, but also domestic investment incentives and, crucially, immigration controls. If the middle class is the foundation of national stability, then every policy must prioritize their economic security and their ability to achieve upward mobility.
That priority on the domestic worker naturally raises the question of who is performing this highly skilled work. That brings us to a surprisingly sharp line the NSS draws regarding competence and merit versus global talent.
Yes, competence and merit are hailed as civilizational advantages. Right. But the NSS draws a very specific and highly controversial line here. It warns that this meritocracy must not be used as a convenient justification to open the labor market to global talent that undercuts American workers.
Interesting. So what's the fear there?
The document argues that past policies that prioritized high-skilled immigration without considering the overall domestic wage structure ultimately depressed wages in key sectors. The strategy fears that if merit is just used to import cheap, qualified labor, America's historic advantages in science, technology, industry, even defense, will evaporate due to internal social discord and wage stagnation.
So we have an economic foundation demanding widespread prosperity, backed by principles of national sovereignty and worker prioritization. And this leads us immediately to the very first strategic priority listed, a necessary precondition for everything else. The era of mass migration is over.
This declaration is absolutely fundamental. The NSS states without any equivocation that border security is the primary element of national security.
The primary element.
The primary one. The document argues that this shift is non-negotiable for defining the nation's future, for ensuring social cohesion, and protecting national security against cross-border threats.
And they list those threats specifically?
They do. Terrorism, illicit drug flows, foreign espionage, and human trafficking.
The argument is stark then. A country that doesn't control who it admits into its borders, and in what numbers, cannot consider itself a sovereign republic.
And thus cannot guarantee the safety of its citizens or its economy.
Exactly. So for the investor, this signals a massive, sustained, and multifaceted investment of national resources.
Absolutely. We are talking about financial, technological, and military assets being dedicated to enforcing border security and immigration controls. This is codified as a permanent, non-discretionary expenditure.
A precondition for all future economic stability.
It is the ultimate foundation block. If domestic security and middle-class economic stability are not secured, the NSS suggests the entire strategy, even the pursuit of technological dominance, is ultimately impossible in the long term.
Because the political and social will to sustain it would just collapse.
It would simply collapse.
Okay, let's pivot from those domestic foundations to regional priorities. The NSS explicitly dedicates a major section to the Western Hemisphere, using a foundational piece of U.S. foreign policy history as its title. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The analysis notes framed this entire push as the One America strategy.
The language is deliberately aggressive and historical. The goal is to aggressively reassert and enforce U.S. preeminence throughout the hemisphere.
And the immediate tactical objective.
It's denying non-hemispheric competitors, and the analysis specifically identifies China here, the ability to position threatening capabilities or, critically, control strategically vital assets anywhere in the hemisphere.
So this is about physical security, resource control, and market dominance all rolled into one.
It is.
That's a powerful statement. So the policy risk for investors who are currently relying on, say, Asian logistics is now explicitly higher than the risk of nearshoring.
That is the structural risk assessment that is embedded in the NSS. The analysis we reviewed suggests that this One America strategy is essentially a demographic and market compensation strategy.
Compensating for what?
Well, China has a massive internal population and a massive market size. The U.S. can't compete on population alone, so the strategic answer is to integrate the entire American continent, economically, politically, technologically, to create a counterbalancing economic and market bloc.
So it's about creating a unified economic bloc that the U.S. leads.
Exactly. This integration allows the U.S. to define the rules of trade and logistics across a much larger, contiguous geographic zone.
This requires specific action, though. The NSS mandates an immediate interagency process to identify strategic points and resources in the hemisphere for protection and joint development with partners. What kind of resources are we talking about here?
We're talking about strategic mineral deposits, rare earth elements, critical infrastructure like ports, railways, energy grids, and of course, next-generation communication networks.
So this isn't just a military exercise.
Oh, not at all. It's a resource mapping and investment planning mandate. It signals where U.S. government capital and political influence will flow first. They want to make the region an integrated, secure economic buffer that is structurally resistant to external influence.
So how do they plan to achieve this integration? The NSS calls this mechanism enlist and expand. What does that mean?
The focus is multi-layered. They want to enlist friends to control migration and stop drug flows, but most importantly for the investor, they will aggressively promote nearshore manufacturing.
And how do they do that? What's the mechanism?
The NSS outlines it, prioritizing commercial diplomacy, using tariffs, and leveraging reciprocal trade agreements as powerful enforcement tools. The goal is twofold. Help partners build robust domestic economies and simultaneously make the Western Hemisphere an increasingly attractive, low-risk market for American commerce and capital investment.
The investment implication here seems massive. A government-backed push for supply chain resilience that actively favors domestic and hemispheric production.
Absolutely. Strengthening critical supply chains in the hemisphere is intended to structurally reduce dependencies on manufacturing in geopolitical risk zones, and that means specifically dependence on Asian logistics and production.
So the economic linkages they're creating are meant to make it harder for outside competitors to gain influence.
Exactly. It makes it structurally harder and more expensive for non-hemispheric competitors to increase their influence or challenge U.S. economic authority in the region. This represents a foundational, long-term shift in global logistics and manufacturing.
This brings us back to the anti-China strategy. The notes explicitly identify the One America strategy as a response to China's rise, integrating the continent to compensate for the U.S.'s relative lack of population and market size.
And the strategy for countering foreign influence is proactive and instructional. The U.S. must actively roll back outside influence by demonstrating the hidden costs that are embedded in allegedly low-cost foreign assistance.
Hidden costs like what?
These costs are explicitly listed in the NSS: systemic espionage, the political and economic damage caused by debt traps, and persistent cybersecurity risks aimed at national infrastructure.
So if they're pushing back, they must also be pushing for American business dominance. What is the actionable mandate for U.S. officials in this regard?
It is remarkably direct. It basically transforms diplomats and officials into economic enforcers. U.S. officials must prioritize helping American companies compete and succeed in securing major business and government contracts in the region.
And they're providing the money to do it.
Yes, and this is the crucial part. They're providing the necessary funding mechanism, utilizing government financing programs, specifically the International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, and the Export-Import Bank to finance the cost of purchasing U.S. goods abroad.
Let's pause on that technical point because this is where the money flows. We mentioned the DFC and the XM Bank were named in the previous draft, but how exactly do they function as marketing and financing arms?
This is critical for any investor to understand. The DFC, for instance, offers things like political risk insurance, equity investment, and debt financing. It essentially de-risks major long-term infrastructure and manufacturing projects in Latin and Central America for U.S. private companies.
So if a U.S. company is worried about political instability,
the DFC can step in with insurance that guarantees the project against, say, expropriation or currency risks. This makes U.S. capital flow much smoother and cheaper than capital from competitors.
and the Export-Import Bank.
Similarly, the Exim Bank provides loans and guarantees that allow foreign buyers to purchase U.S. goods and services. It ensures the contract goes to an American company by solving the financing challenge for the buyer up front.
So these agencies transform government credit instability into an active competitive advantage for U.S. companies.
Precisely. It means if you are investing in American infrastructure, manufacturing, or technology companies, you have the full weight of U.S. commercial diplomacy and government credit actively working to win them contracts throughout the entire hemisphere. That's a structural competitive advantage codified right there in the NSS.
It gets even more direct, doesn't it?
It does. The NSS instructs that where the U.S. has the most leverage, the terms of agreements must be sole source contracts for our companies. And they state they should make every effort to push out foreign companies that build strategically important infrastructure in the region.
That is hyper-focused, government-directed industrial policy married directly to foreign policy goals.
It is. And as a vivid demonstration of this decisive capability, the analysis we reviewed points to a recent, very decisive event. The Venezuela operation.
Right.
The recent forced detention operation of Venezuelan President Maduro is cited as a public, highly visible display of U.S. technological and military superiority and decisiveness.
And the analysis says this was timed specifically.
Yes, the analysis notes this event, happening right as the NSS was being implemented, was specifically designed to demonstrate the beginning of the One America strategy. It signaled to every nation in the hemisphere that the U.S. has the will and the means to commit political and military capital to secure economic outcomes and enforce regional security.
Which is a decisive shift from prior administrations that might have prioritized non-intervention.
A major shift. This was an extraordinary demonstration of force, not just capability. It signaled that the U.S. is willing to use overwhelming capability globally, especially in its own neighborhood, to secure its strategic interests.
Let's move to the sector that most directly impacts our listeners' retirement funds, technology and finance. The analysis introduced a powerful, almost defining concept for this era, the Techno-Dollar.
The Techno-Dollar era, as the analysis defines it, is a necessary evolution of American economic dominance. We're moving beyond the legacy petrodollar era, where global stability was secured by guaranteeing oil trades in U.S. dollars.
Right, that's been the standard for decades.
It has. The Techno-Dollar leverages America's unparalleled lead in digital and frontier technologies, specifically the platforms dominated by the big tech M7 companies, and it converts that technological supremacy into sustained financial supremacy.
So moving from oil to data, essentially, how does
Yeah.
that shift fundamentally secure the dollar's position?
Well, if the underlying infrastructure of global commerce, we're talking AI platforms, cloud computing, digital financial rails, cybersecurity standards, if all of that is controlled, developed, and governed by U.S. domiciled technology, then the natural currency of transaction and settlement must remain the dollar.
And the NSS itself confirms this.
It does. It defines maintaining technological leadership in AI, quantum computing, biotech, and autonomous systems as a key pillar of dominance and a vital national interest.
So the ultimate goal, then, is setting the rules of the future economy.
Exactly. The goal, and this is stated explicitly in the NSS, is to ensure that U.S. technology, U.S. patents, and U.S. standards are what drive the world forward. If America sets the standards for AI ethics, digital finance, and next-gen comms networks, the entire global economic system will be structurally built on American technological foundations.
Which extends the economic and financial leverage of the U.S. indefinitely.
That's the plan.
But to maintain that dominance, the U.S. has to be relentlessly defensive against those who would steal that technological advantage. What are the specific threats the NSS aims to end that harm the U.S. economy?
The list is comprehensive, and it focuses on state-directed economic warfare. It includes predatory state-directed subsidies that deliberately distort markets, unfair trading practices, and, of course, grand-scale intellectual property theft and industrial espionage.
And it also mentions supply chains.
Yes, protection is mandated for access to critical supply chains, including critical minerals and rare earth elements, which are foundational to the technology needed for AI and advanced manufacturing.
And there's a direct link to public safety here, which makes the economic defense deeply personal for the American citizen. The NSS explicitly connects these economic threats to the exports of fentanyl precursors that fuel the opioid epidemic.
That connection is highly intentional, and it elevates the economic defense strategy. It frames the suppliers of these precursor chemicals, who are often directed by state entities, not merely as illegal drug manufacturers.
But as actors in economic warfare.
Precisely. Participants in economic warfare that directly undermine American social stability and productivity. This justifies a much more muscular, interventionist, and unified approach to enforcement and trade policy.
Treating IP theft and precursor exports as two sides of the same national security coin.
Exactly.
Now, for the investor, the ultimate question is the fate of the U.S. financial system and the dollar's status. This is the bedrock of every senior's retirement fund. How does the NSS treat financial dominance?
The NSS views the dollar's global reserve currency status and the U.S. financial and capital markets as pillars of American influence. It says they provide significant leverage over foreign policymakers, regulators, and banks.
And they recognize these are not entitlements.
No, they must be defended and grown. Policy will be focused relentlessly on preserving and growing this dominance.
So how will they preserve this dominance against competition from, say, new digital currencies or sovereign central bank alternatives?
By leveraging America's dynamic free market system and its leadership in digital finance and innovation, they specifically mention blockchain and secure digital payment systems to ensure U.S. markets remain the most dynamic, liquid, and secure in the world.
The envy of the world, as they put it.
That's the phrase. This is a structural mandate to maintain the qualitative advantage of U.S. capital markets against any competitor, whether it's through transparent regulation, speed of transaction, or innovation in financial products.
So let's go straight to the investment thesis confirmation that was provided in the analysis notes, because this speaks directly to our listener. If the U.S. is strategically committed to maintaining financial and technological supremacy, what does that mean for asset allocation?
The analysis explicitly states that this dominance backed by aggressive government policy and resource allocation makes U.S. capital markets the place to invest for safety and growth.
Specifically U.S. dollar-based assets.
Specifically, U.S. dollar-based equity products like ETFs. It goes even further, stating that investing heavily in U.S. big tech ETFs on a dollar basis, leveraged by this whole Techno-Dollar strategy, can lead to economic freedom in 10 years.
That is a bold claim.
It's very bold, but the document essentially serves as high-level government validation that the strategic future of global capitalism is centered on U.S. technology and finance, making U.S. assets the safest long-term bet.
That is the ultimate confirmation for the investor. The strategy isn't just to maintain, but to actively ensure American assets remain the world's most attractive, liquid, and secure investment vehicle through direct policy.
That's the takeaway.
So if Section 3 gave us the capital, the Techno-Dollar Section 4 now focuses on the raw materials and the power needed to execute the plan. The physical infrastructure of the new America. The economic priority is clear: reindustrialization.
The NSS declares, "The future belongs to makers." The strategy demands that the U.S. will actively reindustrialize, dramatically reshore industrial production, and attract massive investment.
Particularly in those critical tech sectors.
Particularly in critical and emerging technology sectors like semiconductors, advanced batteries, and biotechnology. This is a complete structural reversal of decades of outsourcing and offshoring.
But what are the primary structural tools to enforce this reindustrialization? Because simply, wishing factories back home won't work.
They specify two main tools: the strategic use of tariffs and the deployment of new production technologies like advanced automation and 3D printing.
And the tariffs aren't just for raising money.
Not at all. They're designed to raise the cost of goods produced offshore to the point where widespread industrial production becomes economically viable and often preferable right here within the United States. This is explicitly aimed at raising living standards for American workers by increasing domestic manufacturing demand.
To power this massive reindustrialization and to support the sprawling AI data centers required by the Techno-Dollar, we need an incredible amount of energy. The NSS has a very strong stance here.
A very strong stance. Restoring American energy dominance, oil, gas, coal, and nuclear is a top strategic priority.
The strategy is comprehensive then. It prioritizes abundance and low cost above all else.
It does. And crucially, the NSS explicitly rejects what the document terms disastrous climate change and net zero ideologies, arguing that these policies have harmed European economic competitiveness and actually subsidized strategic adversaries.
The goal being maximum utilization of all domestic energy sources.
Oil, gas, coal, and nuclear power, yes.
Okay, let's maintain our impartial distance here and just focus on the strategic rationale. What is the document's logic for maximizing all of these domestic resources?
The logic is entirely pragmatic and strategic. They argue that energy abundance is the ultimate source of strategic power. Cheap and abundant energy is expected to produce well-paying jobs, significantly reduce operating costs for consumers and businesses, and, most importantly, fuel that reindustrialization.
And they link it directly to tech.
They do. The NSS connects it directly to technological supremacy, noting that it is essential for maintaining the advantage in cutting-edge tech like AI, which, as the analysis notes stress, demands vast, reliable power sources for all those data centers. They see energy as the throttle on economic growth.
Given our listeners' high interest in the energy sector, let's drill down into the nuclear connection. The analysis notes stress the rise of nuclear power, especially small modular reactors, or SMRs, as a key component of this energy dominance. Why SMRs specifically?
The NSS's call for nuclear energy validates the industry because traditional sources just can't meet the long-term, high-density power demands of the future industrial base. SMRs are highlighted because they are designed to be smaller, faster to deploy, and can be factory produced.
Which overcomes the huge capital costs and long timelines of traditional nuclear plants.
Exactly. It overcomes the massive capital expenditure and decade-long construction timelines. Nuclear is seen as essential for providing the carbon-free, high-density, reliable baseload power required by massive AI and industrial campuses.
So this is viewed as both a domestic necessity for power generation and a major export opportunity to deepen relationships with allies.
Precisely. Exporting SMR technology becomes a form of what you could call nuclear soft power, helping allies meet their energy needs while ensuring they rely on American technology and standards. This intersection suggests massive, sustained investment in both traditional nuclear plants and especially SMR deployment.
And finally, a strong economy demands a strong defense industrial base, DIB. The NSS calls for a national mobilization here, linking national security directly to industrial output.
The goal is rapid, scaled innovation and production. They are specifically addressing the modernization gap that's been exposed in recent conflicts.
The problem of cheap drones versus expensive defense systems.
Right. The problem of low-cost drones, missiles, and cyber attacks facing off against prohibitively expensive, large defense systems. The DIB must innovate powerful defenses at low cost and be capable of producing modern systems and munitions at a massive scale, quickly.
Reducing mobilization time from years to months.
That's the goal. From an investor standpoint, the DIB revitalization and the energy infrastructure expansion are clear, government-mandated investment and career opportunities. This is a secure, decades-long growth trajectory backed by the highest levels of national policy.
Focused on sectors, energy, technology, defense that guarantee deep pools of safe, dollar-based assets.
It's the definition of targeted, state-backed industrial policy, all aimed at ensuring the U.S. maintains both qualitative technological superiority and quantitative production capacity globally.
As we look outward again, let's address the fundamental change in how the U.S. interacts with its allies. The NSS heralds the end of the U.S., propping up the entire world order like Atlas. This is the core of the new alliance economics. Burden sharing.
Wealthy, sophisticated allies are now expected to assume primary responsibility for their own regions. The NSS introduces the Hague Commitment, which President Trump has set as a new, non-negotiable global standard.
Which is?
NATO countries must now pledge to spend 5% of GDP on defense.
5%. That's a staggering increase from the prior 2% benchmark.
It's a massive shift. Allies have reportedly endorsed this and are now expected to implement major changes to meet it.
Let's put that 5% into perspective, because the 3% doesn't sound like much until you really quantify it.
Yeah.
What is the magnitude of this financial shift?
It's transformative. For a major economy like Germany, which has a GDP of approximately $4.5 trillion, moving from 2% to 5% represents an annual defense spending increase of over $135 billion.
Wow.
For the European Union as a whole, this commitment forces a swing of hundreds of billions of dollars annually. It forces an immediate, massive investment in their domestic defense industrial bases and procurement systems.
And that spending represents a huge new export market for U.S. contractors.
A huge new export market and co-development opportunity for U.S. defense and technology contractors, yes.
So that's a massive transfer of financial responsibility. But what's the incentive structure for allies to comply with this huge hike?
The U.S. will offer favorable treatment on commercial matters, technology sharing, and defense procurement only to those who take more responsibility. This explicitly connects military compliance directly to economic benefits.
So if you pay for your own defense, you get preferential access to the American economy.
That's it. Allies who meet the standard get preferential access. Those who fail to meet it risk being strategically disfavored in terms of trade deals, technology transfer, and diplomatic support.
Now to the most critical economic and geopolitical battleground, Asia. The NSS frames this as economic competition versus military deterrence. The stakes are enormous.
They are. The combined U.S. economy, around $30 trillion, plus the major allies in the Indo-Pacific, another $35 trillion. That's well over half the world economy right there.
The economic future is decided here.
It is. And on the military front, deterring conflict over Taiwan is explicitly a top priority. The NSS identifies dual reasons for this. First, Taiwan's dominance of advanced semiconductor production is indispensable to the whole Techno-Dollar strategy. If those fabrication plants, the most advanced in the world, fall under hostile control, the Techno-Dollar strategy collapses.
And the second reason is its strategic location. Why is that location so vital to the U.S. economy?
Taiwan's geographic location provides direct access to the second island chain, which is a strategic defense line. More importantly for global commerce, approximately one-third of global shipping passes annually through the South China Sea.
So preventing a hostile power from controlling that sea lane is critical.
It's deemed critical to the U.S. economy and broader global interests. The NSS mandates strong measures to ensure those lanes remain open and free of arbitrary closure or interference.
Moving to Europe, the NSS assessment is notably stark. It suggests a decline deeper than just military spending or GDP share.
Yes. The document notes Europe's GDP share has dropped severely from 25% in 1990 to just 14% today, but contends the deeper issue is one of civilizational erasure.
That's a strong term.
It is. They cite unchecked migration policies, critically low birth rates, and transnational bodies undermining national sovereignty as factors leading to long-term instability. The conclusion is pragmatic but severe. It's an open question whether some European countries will remain reliable, strategically aligned, or even internally stable allies within the next 2 decades.
And that lack of confidence informs U.S. priorities, which leads directly to the priority concerning Ukraine. The NSS prioritizes negotiating an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine.
The stated goal here is highly pragmatic. The U.S. sees the continuation of that conflict as strategically destabilizing to its primary regional ally base. It's draining resources, risking unintended escalation, and preventing Europe from focusing on its own internal defense and economic stabilization required by the Hague Commitment.
The goal is to stabilize Europe and reestablish stability with Russia, to focus resources elsewhere.
To focus resources on the Indo-Pacific and the One America strategy, yes.
Amidst all this global realignment, President Trump is dubbed the President of Peace, leveraging his deal-making ability to secure unprecedented peace deals.
The NSS credits his diplomatic leverage with securing peace in 8 conflicts in 8 months. This includes highly complex, long-standing disputes like Israel-Iran and Pakistan-India, and the end of the Gaza war with the return of all hostages.
And this leverage is viewed as more than just a humanitarian success.
Much more. It's seen as an effective way to realign countries toward American economic and political interests, open new markets, and reduce the need for expensive long-term military intervention.
And wrapping up the global picture, we return to the very start of the One America strategy, demonstrated through that decisive action in Venezuela. The analysis cited the forced detention operation of Venezuelan President Maduro as a critical example.
This specific event is presented as an unambiguous public display of overwhelming U.S. capability, military, technological, and in terms of political decisiveness on a global stage.
So it's an example that's meant to serve as both a deterrent and an assurance.
A potent deterrent to adversaries outside the hemisphere and a powerful assurance to partners within it that the U.S. has the will and the means to enforce its new strategic priorities and secure its economic interests decisively.
So after this extensive deep dive into the 2025 National Security Strategy, let's try to synthesize this for you, the learner, focused on your investment future.
The NSS and the One America strategy represent a fundamental, and I would argue irreversible, recentering of U.S. policy. National security is now directly and inextricably linked to domestic economic strength, technological supremacy, the techno-dollar, and the unassailable dominance of U.S. financial markets.
So the strategy aims to make the U.S. the unrivaled partner of choice.
Unrivaled partner of choice militarily, commercially, and financially by aggressively directing capital flow inward or toward the nearshore hemisphere.
The core takeaway for the learner investor is therefore validated by the highest level of U.S. policy planning. The strategy aims to ensure that U.S. dollar-based assets remain the global center of gravity and the safest harbor for capital.
Correct. The analysis confirms that this policy path focused on reindustrialization, energy dominance, which specifically favors nuclear and associated infrastructure, and the continued global leveraging of big tech platforms, validates the strategy of investing heavily in U.S. dollar-based assets for long-term growth and stability.
So the government's strategic mandate is essentially to make American financial products structurally outperform all others.
Through aggressive, unified policy support, yes.
We started by saying this was a compass for investment. It is also, however, a roadmap for society. The NSS ends with a very provocative thought that extends beyond money and technology.
It does. It links long-term security back to that domestic foundation we discussed at the very start.
Right.
The strategy insists on the restoration of American spiritual and cultural health alongside economic strength. It states plainly that long-term security and economic prosperity are impossible without it.
That's a fascinating connection.
They argue that a country must cherish its past glories and its heroes, and that its people must be proud, happy, and optimistic in order for that foundational middle class to thrive and maintain the stability needed for strategic execution.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative question for you, the listener, to mull over. If the NSS is successful in securing technological and financial dominance, thereby validating your investment strategy in big tech and domestic energy, how do you contribute to the restoration of the cultural and spiritual health, the ultimate non-economic foundation of the country, without which, the NSS warns, the entire ambitious plan for economic dominance could still ultimately fail?
That's your deep dive homework, a powerful connection between national strategy and personal responsibility to end on. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.
See you next time.